Hi, and we're live. Thanks for joining us on such a summer evening. Welcome to our third How to Save the Planet live talk. I'm Isabel, and I'm joined tonight by two colleagues, Minna Sullivan and Kat Curry, both are co-leads of our climate campaign. Minna leads on our influencing and policy work, and Kat leads on grassroots activism. 2019 was a huge year for Friends of the Earth, where the team launched the Climate Action Plan for councils and supported local groups to push their own council to adopt the plan. A year on, and we have over 200 climate action groups, but now we're in a completely different environment. After a devastating few months, we now have vital work to ensure that any recovery is green and fair. We have a rare opportunity to rebuild society in a way that benefits the planet and everyone on it. Kat and Minna will talk through our plans and how you can get involved. Then after about 20 minutes, we'll open up for questions and we'll finish at 7:45. We reach out and we have a huge amount of questions, but we'll be taking live ones in the chat, so do submit yours. We'll get through as many as we can. We have two moderators in the chat. They're there to help you out and they'll paste any relevant links. Lastly, the recording will be live on YouTube at the same link, so watch again and please do share with any contacts. So that's enough of me, and I'll pass over and hear about the campaign.
Yeah, thank you so much, Isabel. Kat and I are really excited to be here with you guys and just talk through our work and our vision and how you guys can get involved. So I guess this all really began with, the coronavirus. It rocked our world with an unprecedented challenge, and in a matter of weeks, our society and our economy had to quickly adapt to control the virus, protect our NHS and the health workers who run it. But over the course of these months, as a nation, I think we were really reminded of who and what we most value, from our key workers who our economy, once deemed as disposable, to the importance of cleaner air and access to green spaces. We saw the inspiring nature of communities, coming together, mutual aid groups being one example of that, to really ensure that we left nobody behind. But I think at the same time, it also brought out our ugly truths as a society. Namely the huge inequalities we have, whether it's the privilege to work from home or, the lack of quality green spaces that so many deal with. It's clear that the coronavirus, like the climate crisis, hits the vulnerable hardest. And now we're kind of out of this immediate phase of trying to get the virus under control. The attention turns to, building back better. Now, if I had £1 for every time I heard the phrase build back better, I would be a very, very rich woman. But I guess, the idea of building back better is to really recognize that as a society, we are at a crossroads. Do we go back to a world that left us with this ever increasing gaps between the rich and the poor, huge health inequalities, hurtling towards a climate and ecological crisis? Or do we actually stop, rethink, and move towards a better future, one that rebuilds the foundations of our society and economy so that they work for us all? And what's really clear and pleasing to see is that the public are on our side. The latest poll showed that only 6% of people want to return to business as usual. So now I guess it's obviously the time for government to listen. We have what the Committee on Climate Change is calling a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to not only create a society that genuinely improves lives and livelihoods, but one that fights the climate crisis in the process too. And that's why we really produced our Green and Fair Recovery Plan. I mean, it's kind of underpinned by our Climate Action Plan that many of you might be familiar with, but we wanted to ensure that we weren't just, repackaging the same old solutions that Friends of the Earth would call for. We wanted to ensure that our plan, properly addressed the unique moment of building back from the coronavirus, but with social justice at its heart. So what I'll do is I'll just talk you through the 5 key areas of our plan before handing over to Kat, who will speak on almost the vision behind that work and the things we've been doing to deliver it. So number 1 in that plan is to really prioritise health and well-being. We need to actually prioritise the health and well-being of everyone, our resources, our infrastructure, and the people that improve our quality of life. Human health and the well-being of the planet are so interconnected, and the respected Lancet Commission on Climate Change said, and I'll read out this quote, left unabated, climate change will define the health profile of current and future generations. It will challenge already overwhelmed health systems and undermine progress towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it's so clear how important it is. And for us, the key policies that sit underneath that are three. So we need to make walking and cycling easy for everybody. And to do that, we want to spend around 2 billion annually on that. The UK has much lower levels of cycling compared to countries such as Denmark and Netherlands, and increasing the proportion of people who walk and cycle more will not only help us to combat carbon emissions, but also really will help us deal with the crowded public transport that we have, especially during a period when we're trying to socially distance. It's been really encouraging to see some of the funding that's been made available, so councils can, have temporary cycle lanes, for instance. But the longer term recovery plan has to go further and faster. We need those temporary changes to also be made permanent too. And there's kind of a social kind of justice intersect here as well. Spending on cycling and walking is socially progressive. Almost 50% of low-income families don't have access to cars, and the proportion of women that don't have access is double that to men. Alongside that, we need to reduce air pollution by investing in public transport. In the UK, that we have up to 36,000 premature deaths annually because of air pollution, and transport is the biggest sector for emissions in the UK. So to combat both, we need to invest, properly in our public transport so it's cheap, accessible, and really reduces the reliance we have on cars. And finally, we need to ensure everyone has access to high quality green spaces and ensure that there is a new legal right to a healthy environment. Second in our plan is the idea of putting green jobs and livelihoods at the heart of the recovery. We need jobs that are good for people and good for planet. And instead of propping up declining, polluting industries that aren't fit for purpose, the government must future-proof, livelihoods by investing in cleaner, fairly paid, sustainable jobs. And as part of that, there's kind of key solutions. So we need to invest in kind of a massive program of home insulation to not only kind of really, energy, and make sure we have energy efficiency in our household, but to also help out kind of families that suffer from fuel poverty. So, the UK, we've got old leaky housing, and there are more than 2.5 families in the UK who deal with fuel poverty. And sadly, if the pandemic continues in the autumn and winter, we're likely to see this number increase. So we can combat both in a sustainable way through a scheme like this. We need to help kind of transition workers from failing polluting industries into clean ones with a Just Transition Fund. And that it means that, workers are properly skilled up, properly retrained in an ethical way that really ensures it's about people and planet and not moved in a harsh way that can almost certainly impact their, their livelihoods and also their well-being. And finally, we need to guarantee green jobs and training for those made unemployed because of COVID-19. And this is particularly important for young people as well, who will be hardest hit as they come out of university, for instance, entering the job market for the first time. They need to be, skilled up, they need to be trained properly, but importantly, it has to be done in the industries of the future. We need to fix our broken economy. For too long, we've been contributing to a broken economy in the pursuit of profit above all else. It's a system that's made a lot of, kind of a few people a lot of money at the expense of everyone else, and of course at the expense of future generations too. This has to end. And as part of that, we need to ensure that any financial bailouts of, failing companies come with strict conditions to protect workers and ensure that the industry cuts emissions in line with the Paris Agreement. Bailouts has been a controversial topic, especially when it's, billionaire bosses who haven't paid their taxes in the UK for over a decade. So we need to make sure that this properly aligns with people and planet and makes sense for everyone. We need to help fund the recovery by removing the tax breaks we have for big polluters and the spend that we've currently allocated to climate wrecking infrastructure. Right now, there's 27 billion pledged for climate wrecking roads, and that money has to be reinvested and repurposed for the solutions of the future. And finally, within that, we need to measure the impact of COVID-19 and our recovery plans by how it improves people's lives, not economic growth or GDP. GDP is a terrible measure of success. It's one that can go up while the environment is harmed and being, and decreased. It can go up when, without valuing the workers of unpaid work, mostly done by women. It discounts environmental harm, the damage done by income and wealth inequalities. And he said we need to replace it with metrics that recognize well-being and wellness. And we can follow the examples of the government of New Zealand. The Treasury there has scrapped GDP, and instead they've got new indicators that follow wellness. So there are clear examples. It isn't just almost fluffy thinking of green NGOs. There are concrete examples that we can follow. So second to last, we've got they need to act cooperate globally and act responsibly. Just like the climate crisis, the coronavirus pandemic, impacts the poorest communities and the most vulnerable in society. And we know global problems need global solutions. And as one of the richest countries and a historical emitter, we need to be the one leading the way in that recovery plan. And part of that is, ensure we provide significant climate finance to the rest of the world, particularly to poorer countries, so we can help them in their transition. We need to end UK government investment in overseas coal, oil and gas and invest that in renewable energy. It's shocking that our tax money goes to support climate wrecking projects across the world. So there's no way that the UK can say we are world leaders in climate when they are literally doing the opposite. And finally, within that, we need to make sure that all trade deals guarantee the highest standards of environmental and public health protection. And finally, within our plan, and one that people can say probably most aligns with our values and ethics as Friends of the Earth, is the important need, to empower communities to lead the recovery. So we've seen obviously a huge surge in mutual aid groups, and that's demonstrated the resilience, the kindness, the innovation that lies at the heart of our local communities. And the climate crisis deserves a community-led response too. And as part of that, we need to provide nations and councils with significant new powers and funding so they're able to deliver the recovery on a local level. We also need decision makers to ensure that the most marginalized voices are included and center the decision making process. And we need to help community-led organizations through COVID-19 and invest in them so they're able to be resilient and to build back stronger. So I'll hand over to Kat now, who'll talk us through our vision and what we've been doing so far as Friends of the Earth to realize that.
Great, thanks, Mona. Yeah, so there's a lot there. Just to point out that all of this is also written in terms of our Green and Fair Recovery Plan, which I'm sure our moderators are also posting in the chat, so you can digest that as well. So I suppose what Mona's outlined is what we want to happen. So what I'm going to talk about now is how we're going to make that happen. So central to all of our work at Friends of the Earth is the belief that we can only achieve long-term systemic change if we build and utilise the power of people and support our grassroots communities to really lead that change. So that's why we've been supporting our network of climate action groups and Friends of the Earth local groups to campaign for a green and fair recovery. Alongside that, we've been developing detailed policy positions based on the latest science and data, and really building public support through engaging communications. We also work really closely with others in the movement, such as the Build Back Better campaign, which some of you might have heard of, and our colleagues in the Climate Coalition as well, to make sure that we're all really pushing in the same direction. So just to outline what's happened so far, things have been moving really fast. I'm going to try and give you a bit of a snippet, and some of this you'll probably know if you've been keeping up to date with the news, although it's quite hard to keep up to date with everything at the moment. So last month we mobilised our supporters and our climate action groups to lobby their MPs to advocate for a green and fair recovery plan. So we had over 11,000 supporters write to their MPs in a matter of weeks. So if that was you, thank you so much for doing that. And we also had 20,000 supporters sign our petition, petitioning Rishi Sunak, which we are hoping to continue to grow, and we'll put a link for how you can sign that if you haven't already. At the same time, we were supporting our climate action groups with training and resources on how to lobby their MPs in person, or more likely over Zoom at the moment, which resulted in around 30 MPs being lobbied over the last few weeks. So during this time as well, in June, which feels like yesterday, but was a while ago already, we had the Prime Minister Boris Johnson give a speech where he compared his plan to the scale of Roosevelt's New Deal, when in reality, Roosevelt's New Deal equated to around 40% of GDP, although take your point, GDP is not a great measure, but around 40% of GDP. And Boris Johnson's announcement actually equated to 0.2% of the UK's GDP. So it's not a great comparison and not a particularly honest comparison. He also talked about build, 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 and even used our phrase of build back better. But his speech, largely basically just repackaged existing inadequate commitments, such as on tree planting, and was nowhere near the scale that we need. Then, if you remember, a few weeks ago on the 8th of July, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, gave his speech calling it about the phase 2 of the plan, which was focusing on jobs. You might have seen this in the news because it was, quite big in terms of in the green world, that there was an announcement of a £3 billion package for energy efficiency programme for homes and for public buildings. And the Chancellor said that this investment will help insulate 650,000 homes and create 140,000 jobs, which of course is welcome, but we need to kind of, take a step back and actually see what's needed here. And we know that over the next decade, we need 15 million homes in the UK to be insulated in order to eradicate fuel poverty and to cut greenhouse gas emissions. So we really need this funding to be, far larger, but also kind of multi-year to make that difference. And we need to plan to how we switch homes away from gas heating, which is obviously a crucial thing that we need to do. And also to think about that £3 billion, compare it to what Mona talked about in terms of the £27 billion that are currently earmarked for climate wrecking road programmes. And that kind of totally eclipses that £3 billion that's being pledged for for energy efficiency. Also, looking internationally, the German government has committed £36 billion into climate cutting, economy boosting measures, and France similarly is committing £13.5 billion to tackling the climate emergency. So it's really clear that the UK has a long way to go. So in terms of what's next for us and this campaign, so now our attention turns to the autumn budget, which is when the Chancellor is going to be announcing kind of phase 3, which he's calling rebuild. And this is where basically the kind of fuller government announcement of a recovery package will happen. It will sit alongside also the comprehensive spending review, which essentially sets out government spending plans for the next 4 years. So it's a really key moment that we need to urgently influence. And we need to make sure that kind of through that budget and that comprehensive spending review, that the government deliver on a recovery plan which works for both people and for planet. So as part of this, what we're planning on doing is mobilising again our supporters and our 200 climate action groups to take part in a moment of action in September. Now, plans are still a little bit underway, and we're hoping to be able to share something more with you soon, and also to get input from many of you as well. But it's very likely to involve lots of creative stunts across the country. Another push on MPs when they come back from their summer holidays, and another push again on the ministers responsible for the recovery package. We're also going to be seeking the support of councils and mayors, asking them to leverage their local power in support of the national recovery as well. So just in terms of how you can get involved, you might be sat there thinking, this all sounds great, I'm ready, how can I join in? So the best thing that you can do is to get involved in your local climate action group or a Friends of the Earth local group near you. You can find if there's a group near you by clicking on a link which the moderators will put in the chat. So do join in, see what's going on with that group. Most of the groups are pushing for this green and fair recovery at the local level, as well as working on other things that you'll probably be interested as well in terms of climate projects in the community. If there isn't a group near you, but you're still interested in getting involved, we can support you to match up with other people in your community and start one. So we'd also love to hear from you if you fit into that category. There also might be people on the call who are already part of a group, which is fantastic. So this is a plea to join in with the September mobilisation so that we're all pushing for the same thing at the same time. Whether that be that you could organise your own creative socially distanced stunt, or kind of meet with your local MP again or for the first time. So we'll be circulating more details about the September mobilisation moment really soon, in the next week or so. Also, of course, there's be people on the call. If you don't have time to join a group right now, that is absolutely fine. There's still ways that you can campaign for a green and fair recovery. We would ask that you sign the petition that we have to Rishi Sunak, demanding a green and fair recovery, which I'm sure the moderators are putting in the chat box. And also, please do share messages of support. Talk about this with your friends and family, but also share on social media. The great thing to do is to tag your MP in anything that you put out on social media, so that they can see that their constituents care as well. And do kind of keep an eye on any future actions that we put out, but also that your local climate action group or local group might be doing in September. So you might not be able to get involved with the group, but you might be able to take part in any stunt or anything that they organise. So I'm going to leave it there because I think we've spoken enough, and hand back to Isabel.
Brilliant, thank you. That was really exciting stuff. But yeah, before we all get out and rally up our neighbours, we've got some questions. I'm going to start with a pre-submitted one, but we've got some coming through live already, but there's still time to put yours in. So Muna, we're going to start with a question for you from Graham. He asks, what kind of green employment opportunities should we be demanding of the government to replace fossil fuels and other polluting industries?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And yeah, our plan really recognises that green jobs are kind of the heart of the recovery. For me, I guess jobs are in an element of, there's jobs we need to create, we need to invest in. There's kind of jobs we need to stop and transition, and there's areas we can transform. So I'd say the big areas are obviously home installation and eco-heating, and the knock-on impact it can have on kind of social justice issues like fuel poverty. The government have obviously pledged 3 billion, but just for energy efficiency, but we need this money to be, as Kat said, longer term, multi-year, for the industry itself to start kind of investing in it, and really developing the technology we need to see around it. So that's one big area. There's also renewables, kind of investing in kind of the renewable infrastructure, which in and of itself could create, thousands of jobs. But there's also elements like, for instance, with the motoring industry, that could be transformed and pushed into spaces where it's much about electric cars, as a way to transition out of kind of polluting vehicles. But that has to be coupled with things like phasing out of petrol and diesel, which we're calling for to be done by 2030, and not by 2035, which is the government's current figures.
Thank you. I've got live questions coming now from Dr. Christina Nellis. Are Friends of the Earth working with international partners to compare and contrast plans? I'm not sure.
Yes, absolutely. So Friends of the Earth, we're part of an international federation. Friends of the Earth, England, Wales and Northern Ireland, we're one of 70 plus. So we absolutely are doing this trying to produce a plan that works for the global south, and it isn't about just kind of domestic plans. So we kind of use our kind of connections to try and ensure that the policies we produce are in line with that. And one key area within that plan, which we're working very closely with international partners, are around our kind of removing fossil fuel funding, UK funding for fossil fuel projects abroad, specifically around a project in Mozambique. We're working with not only Friends of the Earth Mozambique, but also working with European organisations, Friends of the Earth Europe and European branches of it, I guess, to really kind of understand how we can take forward things like legal opportunities around it. So yeah, we're always trying to keep that conversation open. Ultimately, as an organisation, we recognise that it's the global south that are the most impacted, and we need to make sure that as the global north, that everything we do aligns with that.
Brilliant, thank you. And then one for Kat. This is pre-submitted from Claire. Do you think at last that there is an appetite for change in the sectors of society where before there hasn't been? And if so, can we take advantage of this momentum?
Yeah, great question, Claire. And yeah, I absolutely do think that there's an opportunity here. The pandemic turned everyone's world upside down, but some people's world more than others, which we need to keep recognising and remembering. But ultimately, I think that people have seen that when a crisis hits, the government can act and society can change within a matter of days, which, felt inconceivable before. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I remember like literally a few weeks before lockdown, and rumours were flying around about, you know, London-wide lockdown, and my friends and I were like joking around about, you know, how we'd survive and what tins of soup we'd get in and things like that. But it was not on our mind that it would actually happen, and that change, and it would happen that quickly. And I think this has, you know, blown everyone's kind of imagination open in a way. You know, obviously remembering that this crisis has been completely devastating for so many people, you know, people who've lost loved ones and lost livelihoods. And it's, you know, really, as Mana's been talking about, it's like really highlighted, you know, deep-rooted inequalities that, you know, is at the heart of all crises, including the climate crisis. But I also think it's shown us like how willing and able people are able to change when they feel it's necessary. So in terms of like how we take advantage of it, I mean, a few thoughts. I mean, we can't let things slip back to normal. Not that everyone sort of wasn't normal, and normal didn't work for the planet, and it didn't work for the vast majority of people on this earth. Personally, I think it would be great for us to kind of try to keep in a reflective mood for at least a little while. You know, we don't want people to slip back to exactly how things were, and actually try and reflect and think, you know, what have I learned through this experience? You know, what actually things from the lockdown do I want to kind of take through into my life in the future as well. I think that we absolutely need to start making the connections between this crisis and the climate crisis and the crisis of systemic racism and all the things that are completely connected. And you know, and we need to show that change can be positive as well, and that, you know, it's a bit crass language, but there is an opportunity here. You know, phrasing things in terms of there being, you know, opportunities for longer lasting, better jobs, as Mana's been talking about. You know, active travel in terms of walking and cycling, but that not just being good for socially distancing, but being good for our health and our planet as well. You know, maybe we don't all need to take flights every year anymore. Maybe there's flight-free holidays that we can be taking as well, and consuming less. But I think the main thing that we need to build on coming out of this is this community connections that we've had kind of come through in this crisis. And Mana was talking about the mutual aid groups, but, you know, I think it's been incredible to see how communities have come together during this crisis. And I think if we're going to be able to influence the Conservative government to take the climate crisis seriously, we can only do that through building power locally, and kind of, you know, building power up. And I think we've got a really amazing kind of jumping off point now with these newly formed connections and community strength. So I suppose that's what keeps me hopeful at the moment.
Great, thank you. We've got a live question here from Libby Blake. It's something we sort of touched on a little bit, but the question is it possible to save the planet whilst retaining a commitment to a growth economy?
Yeah. I'm writing down. That's a really interesting question. I think one that is debated a lot in the environment movement. It's people's favorite question. I think for us as Friends of the Earth, and as an organisation that's fighting for people and planet, you know, growth cannot come at the expense of our planet, and it cannot come at the expense of the people who live in it, and our finite resources. But within that, there's an element of actually transforming. So it's the idea of, you know, when I said earlier, you know, how do we measure success? You know, I think for a long time we've been measuring success under economic growth solely, under this very narrow GDP window. But we actually need to broaden it out and define success much more than that. Success is about the health of a nation, the well-being of a nation, the sustainability of a nation as well. And I think following the model of you know, governments like New Zealand, where they broaden out what they mean by, you know, success, is one that I think we should follow. I think also within that, sometimes people feel like investing in the economy or investing in the climate kind of almost go in two different pots. But I think what this crisis has shown for us is that it's the same thing. You know, we can build out of coronavirus in a way that, you know, gets the economy going, gets jobs, you know, created and secured, but also works for the planet as well. And sometimes I think we just need to, I feel like people can get quite either or with this argument, but we just need to broaden it out and just see it in the lens. But at the heart of it has to be the sustainability of the world for ourselves and for future generations.
Great, thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left for questions, so do put some more in if you have them. Next, we have one for Kat. What is your suggestion for the single best way to make a politicians listen? And that's from Bronwyn.
It's a good question, Bronwyn. I don't know if I have a single best way, but I can give a few thoughts.
Your top ones.
My top ones. Okay. Well, firstly, I know it's not easy. I think we've all been in situations where politicians have fobbed us off, or, you know, they're busy, they've got their own agendas, they're getting pulled in lots of different directions. I think a few kind of initial thoughts. First one would be consistent and persistent. Like, one-off interactions with MPs, you know, will signal that you care about something, and that's important, but it won't necessarily put pressure on your MP to actually do something about that, you know, about your issue. They need to know that if they don't act, you will keep following up with them until they do. So, you know, really kind of building that relationship and you know, being that annoying person of like, I'm going to keep coming back. It's what MPs are paid to do, and to listen to you. I think the second kind of key one would be around linking to their agenda. So, you know, figure out what they're interested in and really try and link your issue to it. So, you know, for example, if they are kind of, you know, economic minded, you know, mostly focused on business, you know, using that argument that Mana was just talking about in terms of the economic benefits of investing in green energy and green jobs. If they're passionate about women's equality, you know, you can show how it'll be women that will be hit worst by the climate crisis. I think, though, probably the most, if I'm going to say the single most important thing on my side, and I would say this because I'm more on the grassroots activism side, but it's to really show that you're not alone. You know, I think that's the most important one. Politicians need to know that you're not the only constituent who cares about that issue. They need to know that there's broad support across their constituency, or at least support from the people that they, you know, they care about voting for them. So, you know, I would just say kind of make connections in your community with other groups, with other, you know, faith groups, with businesses, with people that are beyond our green bubble, and ask people to sign on to your petitions, you know, reach out to people who you wouldn't normally think about reaching out to, you know, because I don't think there's anything more important than building power. And it's, you know, it's even more important than knowing the issues inside out, is making sure that you've got lots of other people that are standing alongside you. Yeah. And joining a climate action group is a perfect way of doing that.
Number one way.
So funny, Kat, just the principles that Kat laid out on an individual level are almost like the same principles we use as an organisation in terms of trying to implement. So I think they're very universal.
Brilliant. And then we've got one from Adrian following on. Do you think that central government or local councils should lead the green recovery, and why?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, Adrian. And I think, you know, us as Friends of the Earth, I think it's recognising almost, firstly, you know, what is the responsibility of central government and local, and by local, it's, you know, your local council, you know, your mayor, you know, there's many kind of regional levels to it. But in kind of the fight against coronavirus, we need to recognise that, you know, a lot of it has to be delivered through and with local governments, and that's why we were really keen in our recovery plan to have, you know, a very specific priority on empowering communities to lead the recovery. And that means ensuring that, you know, local governments have the powers and funding they need to actually do that. I mean, no one is shocked to hear that, you know, already stretched local councils are kind of virtually bankrupt because of because of coronavirus. It's hit them in many ways, some for, you know, for different reasons, and also just the geography of across the UK. It would be virtually impossible to deliver a recovery centrally, just because of how different each area looks and the different needs that they have. So absolutely, I think it's just recognising that central government have to deliver the essential funding, the essential powers, but that needs to be done through and with local governments.
Brilliant. And then we've got one from Rose Bennett, who asks, post-lockdown, the problem will be avoidance of public transport and the increase in single-use plastic, both for understandable reasons, so gloves and masks, etc. But how and when can we reverse this when the pandemic is under control?
Yeah, I'm happy to say that. I think the first thing to say is that, like, the lockdown and coronavirus is so unprecedented. It's something that we in our generations have never had to deal with before at this kind of scale and the impact of it. So I think I would want to firstly advocate that whatever you need to do to feel like you're safe and that you're well do that without shame, and without kind of concern or worry that, you know, almost kind of any guilt around that, because I think that should come first. And I would say, with things like, you know, kind of masks, for instance, there's always kind of sensible advice about investing in reusable and washable masks, but obviously leaving the kind of like medical grade stuff to the people that need it the most. And it's kind of very similar to the conversation around you know, coffee cups, and kind of the idea of, you know, investing in reusable. I think the question was about kind of like how can we reverse that. Certainly with things like transport, there are kind of quick wins that we can do now. So we've already seen councils invest in active travel, so, you know, repurposing areas so we can have wider roads or cycle lanes. Those are the kind of the bigger things that we need to not only become permanent, but we need to see greater investment in. We need to see 2 billion annually invested in walking and cycling, so it's easier for everyone, particularly around, you know, especially in areas where people are so reliant on cars, for instance. I think that's where we kind of need to see that spend, but alongside it, we do need to see investment in kind of cheap, safe public transport, affordable public transport, and I think as we come out of the lockdown, and I guess the behavior and the worry is that people might kind of run back to the car because it just feels safer. We need to ensure that the sustainable solutions are there and the infrastructure is being thought of longer term. It's more than about a few months, more than about a year. It's about the next few years, and how, you know, we define that means that, and how we make that work has to come, you know, top down. It has to come from government leading the way with the funding and the direction we need. So for me, I think I am always the optimist. I'm always pretty hopeful that I think actually the people power and even the public support, like the poll after poll has showed that people do not want to go back to normal. And I think for us, it's about kind of using that pressure to ensure we get the longer term changes, to ensure that, like, you know, for instance, transport is there and accessible and is green. Yes, I think that's probably it. It's also kind of things on waste. It's hard to say, but I would say put your safety first and what you feel comfortable with.
Great, thank you. Kat, this is a good one for you. It's from Harry, and he says, I believe to save the planet, we need a ground up movement of people driving change through their everyday actions. Do you have any advice on how we can reach those people who seem to have no interest in climate change?
Well, I agree, Harry. That's not a surprise. We absolutely do need a ground-up movement of people power. Yeah, so I suppose the question then is about how do we reach people that, you know, aren't currently talking about the climate crisis or taking any interest in taking action on the climate crisis. For me, the first thing to do is to try to understand why people might not be taking an interest in the climate crisis. For me, what I need to always do is to check my privilege and to understand my privilege. And actually, not everyone in the UK has the luxury almost of being able to think about the climate crisis. If you're a single mum on a minimum wage, you're thinking about how to feed your kids, how to pay your electricity bill. If you're a young black man, might be thinking about how to stay safe, how to get a job despite kind of the systemic racism that he would face every day. So I think as people concerned about the climate crisis, we have to just first of all remember that not everyone necessarily has the luxury of looking that far ahead. Obviously, we can see it getting closer to us, but so kind of combined with that, then what I would suggest is, I think as climate activists or as people who care about climate change, we first of all have to stand alongside these other people's struggles. And I think we've all seen this with things like Black Lives Matter, that it's really important that we have to just get out of our green bubble and really kind of try to support other people's struggles first, because they're the things that are in people's daily lives. And then of course we can try to make links of how those crises link to the climate crisis as well. And I think that's probably the second thing I would say is really to meet people where they are. So to really try to make the climate crisis and particularly the solutions really relevant to people's daily lives. So thinking about showing how it links to energy bills or bringing down energy bills or long-term job security or to, cleaner air for their children to breathe, better parks for their communities to enjoy. So really breaking down this kind of big existential threat, which might feel a million miles away for people, to really kind of bringing it home to daily lives and how it might affect their and their families' daily lives. I think the other thing I would just stress is, and we all need to remember this, is to not expect people to campaign in the same way that you might campaign. So, some of us are really comfortable in formal meetings or signing online petitions or even, protesting on the streets, but not everyone will be. So I think a really key thing when trying to get more people involved is to be really open to changing how you might campaign, but also trying to work with those people to create kind of new menus of options and opportunities for them to engage in your campaign.
Great, thanks. And then we've got time for just a really quick one. I've got one from Derek Mailer here, asking about how young people can get involved, particularly in pushing for a change within trade unions.
Yeah, so I'll try and do it quickly. Yeah, so I mean, young people over, I guess, the last 2 years or year and a half, with kind of inspiration from Greta Thunberg, have been doing an amazing job in building this kind of movement and really spearheading and really kind of asking the government to deliver solutions that will ensure their futures. And I think as part of, there's kind of some key things I would say as part of that. So Kat, please jump in if I misquote kind of the climate action groups, but they can get active locally, work with their community groups and work alongside them and kind of climate action groups, Friends of the Earth groups, to really have their voices heard. They can also join the Teach the Future campaign, which is an education campaign calling on the government to deliver very specific things, including teachers training on climate, including kind of revamping the curriculum, and even just making sure that the buildings are fit for purpose and work in a sustainable way. I would say with trade unions, there's kind of there's also an alliance or a group called the Greener Jobs Alliance, and they specifically are calling for kind of greener jobs. So they're not necessarily a campaigning body, but they're a group of unions who are trying to push for change, and they certainly would love to hear from young people because they themselves are not necessarily that young as well, so they might need the support in that way. I don't know if you have anything to add, Kat.
No, just that it's a great question. We definitely need to get unions on board, and there's obviously that tension between immediate job security, of things like people working in airlines and things, and the climate crisis. But we have to work together to make sure that we can transition people into cleaner jobs. But I think it always is young people that's leading the way in these things. So I wouldn't be surprised if young people are the ones that can persuade the unions. So yeah, I suppose get involved in your union, stand for elections. Because it's definitely a really, really important target right now.
Great, thank you. So that's all we've got time for this evening. So thank you everyone for joining, and thank you to Kat and Minna. Great presentation. We've covered loads, but if your question didn't get answered or you have follow-up points, do email us at info@foe.co.uk. This is our third live talk, and you can go back and listen to the previous episodes if you missed them. Or we have a whole catalogue of How to Save the Planet podcasts, who Minna is the lovely host of. Variety of issues there and very interesting guests. Most recently, we had Cassie Flynn from UNDP. Then Kat also covered how you can get involved. There'll be links shared in the chat now, so please make sure you sign our petition and check out where your closest climate action group is. And then get ready for our September mobilisation to get proper support for our green and fair recovery. Thank you everyone, and goodbye.